Hey everyone, and thank you for joining us for our first virtual Songwriters and Composers Wing Town Hall. When we first launched the S&C Wing just 3 years ago, we wanted it to be a platform that elevates and supports and advocates on behalf of all songwriters and composers. Right now, I know there are a lot of questions and concerns in the songwriting community about what's happening in the industry and what's going on in the future of our craft. Throughout this town hall, you'll hear from industry leaders and experts and from some of your fellow songwriters as they address some of the biggest issues facing songwriters today. I hope you'll find these conversations informative and empowering. Today, we are so lucky to be joined by my good buddy, Guy Blake, one of the best attorneys that I've ever worked with. In fact, I've been working with him for a long time. He's from the firm Granderson de Rocher, and what can I say? He's an expert in all things music. But specifically, I've worked a lot with Guy around publishing and songwriters issues. So happy to have you here, Guy. Thank you, buddy.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the issues facing songwriters. It's a very unique time in our industry. Things are changing, technology is evolving, the legal side and the framework of how songwriters protect themselves and enter into agreements has evolved. So I'm hopeful that we can talk a little bit about that, Guy. Maybe first tell me some of the things that have changed in the last 3, 4, 10 years as it relates to songwriters and publishers.
Well, I think it's an exciting time for songwriters. The leverage that they currently wield is greater than it has been in a long time.
Really?
And I think that when it comes to negotiating with music publishers and administrators, they kind of have to ask themselves, what are they looking for in those types of deals? I think traditionally there's been this sense of, oh, well, publishers are just a money play. They're just a bank, right, and that's all I'm going to get from them. And that's actually not true. I think a lot of publishers, most publishers have really put a lot of resources into providing service. And that's not just talking about administration, about collection and licensing, but in providing creative opportunities. And so when a songwriter is thinking about doing a music publishing deal or an administration deal today, they should be considering what do they want out of it? What's the most important thing to them? Is money most important to them? Is development important to them? Is putting them in rooms, getting them into rooms that they may not collaboration opportunities? Is film opportunities, sync, pitching, those types of opportunities, is that important to them? Maybe it's a combination. And I think once a songwriter puts some thought into that about what they need, they can then figure out what the most important points are to negotiate.
But what's crazy, and we've been through this, you much more than I have, we've seen writers who just want to do a publishing deal. They don't know why. They don't know what the benefit is. They don't know what the services are. So if you're a new writer, first of all, what I hear you saying is make sure you understand why you're going into a publishing deal. If it's just a financial component or dynamic that you need to handle, that's one thing. But if there's other things at play, figure out what it is and have a purpose. Because if you go into a publishing deal without a purpose, you're basically just handing off a percentage of your ownership and taking potentially could be a small fee. So what are things that you would suggest to a young new writer that he or she should pay attention to when they're thinking about going to a publishing deal? They're like, I don't know what I want to do. I want to do a deal.
Yeah. And I think it's almost like having a business plan, that as a songwriter, your business plan is unfolding your career. And and there's nothing wrong with wanting money. Music publishing
songwriters they got to eat.
That's exactly right.
Live so they can write.
And unlike a record deal, unlike a lot of deals in our industry, a music publishing advance, if you will, is one of the few pieces of money that actually goes into your pocket as a songwriter.
Right.
In a recording agreement, a lot of that money is used for the budget, production, so forth. So it's okay to use that music publishing deal as a way of banking up, but know what you're going to do with that money. Know how you're going to reinvest that money in your career.
Don't buy a necklace.
No necklaces, no trips to Vegas, no cars.
Use the money to sustain yourself while you're writing, while you're perfecting your craft for the next year, 18 months, because it's going to take that long for you probably to create any new revenue or write a song that's going to create revenue.
I think you hit on it, that you need to know what you're going to do with that money. You're going to invest that money back into your business, which is writing songs, presumably writing hit songs. And so you need a long-term plan about how much you're going to need, how you're going to use it, and most importantly, pay taxes on that. I've seen so many clients run into problems where they get an advance, they get a payment, and they never think to pay their taxes on that. And that's a real source of problem. The other area I think that people get hung up on is, there's a lot of chatter within the songwriter community of, oh, do an admin deal, do an administration deal, don't do a co-publishing deal, don't do a publishing deal. And I think people get hung up on the names of the deal. Publishers and lawyers today have a real good groove in terms of negotiating with each other. And they're not set on any one label. You can have a co-publishing deal that has all of the benefits of an administration agreement, which is to say you get your rights back at a certain point. Or you can have an administration agreement that has the traditional upsides of a co-publishing deal, which is to say big money, those types of big service, right. Creative opportunities, A&R. So you can have a hybrid. And so I wouldn't get caught up on pigeonholing yourself into this. I'm only going to do this type of deal. That's the only kind of deal I want.
What are some of the things that have changed in your viewpoint from, again, 5 years ago to now, things that you're seeing different that weren't in contracts previous? What are things that you protect your writers against nowadays?
I think probably the biggest problem I've seen songwriters run into over the years is the length of the term. That the music business is one of the few industries that still has very long-term contracts. Most entertainment industries have moved on from that. You look at the film business or the television business, you're not tied into contracts for a particularly long period of time.
Right.
And the music business, there's still this kind of notion of, oh, I'm going to be in this deal for the rest of my career. And I think the term, the length of time that you're signing to the publisher has shortened. That for the most part, it's usually 3 years that you're signing to. Maybe there's an option after that where the publisher can extend by paying some additional money. But in general, it's pretty straightforward these days. It used to be that there was a delivery commitment and it had to be recorded and released during a particular time of year in a full moon. And if it doesn't, then it doesn't count. And that's gone by the wayside.
So it's a term. You prefer shorter term, or do you think longer term?
When I'm representing the songwriter, yeah, absolutely. It's you want to be able to take advantage of your success. So if you go into a deal where you're in a shorter period of time and you do have that success, you're going to be in a position to renegotiate or to change up things sooner.
Right. So what about success metrics or thresholds in the deal, so that if you are successful in one of the early terms, you have the ability to upsize the deal?
I think there's a lot of opportunity to build in bonuses or other payments, sometimes reducing the commission you're paying that would be linked to success.
Right.
So if I'm recouping the amount you pay me, now my commission that I'm paying you goes down, for instance, or maybe you pay me an additional advance, or some other types of triggers are always available.
So there's ways to build it in so that if you catch a hit in the first 2 years of your deal, the deal adjusts for that.
For me, that's what's most important for me, because we represent primarily we're on the talent side. So we are banking on our clients. We are banking long-term that the clients are going to be successful going forward, more successful than they were yesterday.
Sure.
And so I want to have, as a lawyer, I want to have that opportunity to tap back into that deal and build leverage for my client.
So is there any level setting you can do to writers that are signing co-pub deals as to what they can expect in the way of services? Because I see a lot of writers, they do deals, then they're upset because either they don't feel like the collections were done properly, or they weren't put in the right rooms to collaborate with other writers, or they just didn't get a one-on-one connection with an A&R representative. Is there things that you can say, hey, new writer, you just signed this deal, here's what you can expect?
I think that it is a challenge for the publishers to, guarantee that level of service. So when we're talking about service, we're talking about, all the things, collaboration opportunities, pitching, being there for the opportunity, for the songwriter creatively. And it's a challenge because you can't, in a contract, write that down. You can't promise to do those things and have some degree of measure. So while I, as a lawyer, can negotiate those deal terms that are on paper, I can't negotiate the services that the publisher and the songwriter are going to give to each other, because it is a collaborative relationship. But I can say that the best thing the songwriter can do is to stay up in the publisher's face, to develop that relationship, not just with their single A&R person, but with multiple A&R people. The chairman, the chairpersons of each of these companies have all made themselves very, very available to songwriters. They're all very approachable.
So then what you might say is, in considering doing a deal, make sure you're understanding the relationships and who do you get along with, who do you feel like a good vibe and connection with, because although it can't be in the contract, if you have a solid relationship with your A&R person or even the leadership of the publishing organization, they'll be more likely to receive your call, do meetings, come to the studio.
Absolutely. And also if they feel like you're working.
Right.
So many songwriters will do a publishing deal of some sort, and then it's in their rearview mirror, and they're going off. They're just like they were before they did a publishing deal.
Right.
And they have to kind of remember to maintain those relationships, to check in, to set meetings, to send music to the publisher, so there can be that interactive relationship. That being said, there's no guarantee it's going to happen.
But that being said, the way I've always approached it, and I've encouraged other writers to approach it, is yes, find the people you get along with, find the people that you think believe in you and your talent, but then work like they don't. You have to go out and write songs like you're on your own. You have to hustle songs like you're on your own. You have to be meeting artists, being in studios, and then the publisher can hopefully be a complement to your own efforts.
I mean, you know that personally. So the songwriter, the talent is always going to have to work 100% harder than anybody else on their team.
Right. Don't get it confused.
That there is never a moment where you should be taking your foot off the gas. Just because as an artist you do a record deal, or as a songwriter maybe you do a publishing deal, just because you have these new team members now as part of your team, that's not a time to say, okay, now I can relax. Right. They're going to do it for me. Quite to the contrary. And that is the time where you lead the pack. I tell every creative in the industry that ultimately they are the chairperson of their own corporation. They have to be there at every facet of their business.
And understand it.
Right. And put the right team around them, as every chairperson does.
Right.
You have a general counsel, and you have a chief marketing officer, and a CFO, and so forth.
Brand officer, yeah.
Ultimately, you are responsible for the success of that corporation, and that songwriter is the head of their own company in that sense.
And the other thing is, publishers like to see self-starters. They like to see people that are motivated, out there hustling, doing good work for themselves on their own behalf. And they'll usually come in, they call that, pouring gasoline on the fire, right? You got to start the fire, and then the publishers will come in. So good advice.
And knowing what you need. Being able to direct that publisher to say, look, I want to get me to this artist.
Right.
Or
specific,
get me to
target specific
this
goals.
Producer. If you give them specific goals like that, then they can execute on it. If you're just waiting for them to come up with the ideas, that's going to be a more frustrating relationship, because now you're both shooting in the dark.
Right. I've seen a lot of people be very successful without publishers. I've seen a lot of people have great relationship with publishers and publishing companies. So there's no one way to do it, right? You can find your path. Some people will get along great in the publishing environment, and at the end of the day, you need somebody to collect what hopefully will be your millions and millions of dollars of your earnings. But publishers can be great. Publishers can be a huge asset.
There's a reason why that part of the business has developed the way it is. It's a necessary service, and it's a necessary exercise to, at minimum, go out there and collect. They call it a penny business for a reason, because it's made up of fractions of pennies. And if you don't have somebody who knows what they're doing collecting that money for you, you're never going to receive that money. It's not going to magically get to you.
Let's talk about another technology that I think is something that we're all concerned about as songwriters, and that's like AI, artificial intelligence and generative AI, and how that might affect songwriters. What's your just maybe overarching perspective, and then we can drill down onto the legal side of it.
Yeah, well, I think that maybe it's my perspective because I'm the old guy in the room, and so I've been through this before. The industry for over 100 years has dealt with adapting to new technologies. And every time we have a new technology, the industry struggles for a moment to find its groove. I don't have any concerns that we as a music industry are not going to find a groove with AI. I think there are a lot of challenges, of course. Legally speaking, AI is the first time we're dealing with is it even copyrightable? So to kind of back up a little bit, in order to, at least in the United States and most throughout the world, in order to have something that you can call your own, that's protectable, that's copyrightable, you have to have some degree of creativity. And it has to be human creativity. And then, of course, it has to be fixed. So just humming a tune in the shower doesn't create a copyright.
Right.
But the minute you record that, whether it's video or audible only, or write it down, now it's a copyright. And I think the first issue is truly AI-generated content even copyrightable, because theoretically it's being created by a computer. AI companies cannot just simply put something out there and decide it's theirs, and then they own that copyright, whether it be a version of an artist's voice or an image that of that artist, or a song that kind of sounds the style of artist X or songwriter Y.
Yeah.
And so I think that's going to be the initial struggle for what can we call ours,
right,
versus theirs,
and how to monetize it, because without a copyright, you can't monetize it.
That's right. I think the other struggle is leading to what they call training, which is AI has to learn from somewhere.
Right.
And so in order to learn the styles of music that it's going to now generate, it has to train.
To listen.
It has to listen. And so the question becomes, is merely listening to music and learning from music and mimicking those styles, is that something that a songwriter can prevent? Is that something that a record company can prevent? Is it copyright infringement?
Right.
And that also is going to be one of the challenges in defining those.
Is there anything you're doing in contracts now that says, or is there any language that you're seeing in publishing contracts that prevent people's catalogs from being used for large learning models, large language models?
It's a battleground right now when it comes to approvals. So there are certain approvals that we will negotiate with the companies to say, look, you're charged with managing this catalog. However, you can't do the following things without me approving as the songwriter.
And one of those things is AI.
One of those things that's increasingly a battleground is licensing it for AI. Right. So to a large degree, it's training. Are you going to allow my song to become the subject matter, the guinea pig, for training purposes for some AI company?
Right.
But I think that not all of AI is this notion of mimicking.
Right.
AI has a lot of positives that are happening.
Sure.
There are tools that are being created today that allow songwriters to write easier and to write better. That's where I think a lot of the exciting models are today, that are right there at songwriters' fingertips.
Yep.
I was recently watching a lecture by one of the professors at Berklee College of Music, and he said it right. He said that there are mixing tools, AI mixing tools, that allow to, he phrased it, start the conversation. That if you have a songwriter and you're struggling and you just have this block going on, that you can use AI tools to give you some ideas and say, here's a few options.
Yeah.
And begin that flow of the creative process.
Yeah.
That's an interesting tool. So I think there's a lot of models out there that are going to assist in the songwriting process, as opposed to ripping off the songwriting process. And as the business becomes more more transparent, and we know where they're going to be making money. We know where the licensing schemes are going to be. I think that those are going to be more and more the basis for our industry monetizing that, licensing and protecting that training, as well as giving the opportunities to these AI companies that are creating positive models, not just simply trying to mimic or rip off songwriters or voices or images.
So just a broad question. Anything else you're seeing from a legal perspective as it relates to songwriters right now? Challenges, opportunities, threats to our business? What are things that you're worried about as a representative for a songwriter?
I'm bullish on our industry right now. I think that we have a number of industry organizations and trade groups, the Grammys being one of them, NMPA being another, that are really successfully advocating for the talent and increase in compensation for the talent. We've just gotten a huge increase in the streaming rates for the songwriters. And while it may not have hit yet, I think that's going to. I think that songwriters are going to be putting more streaming dollars in their pockets in the future than they are today, certainly. And I see that just hockey sticking up. I don't see any reason to stop.
Yeah,
for that. Yeah. No, I think that
we talk a lot about it, the songwriters and composers wing, like the whole industry is built on great songs and great composition. So if we don't take care of our songwriters, it's going to be a tough day.
You're right. I mean, nothing in our industry happens until some songwriter somewhere goes,
create something amazing,
right? And that it's not as songwriters aren't out there as much in front of the public eye, and so you're right. They are oftentimes forgotten, but I don't think they're being forgotten by the industry.
No, they're not. And the industry's been great. There's a lot of change that's happening. Even within the Academy, we're trying to highlight songs. You saw we had the Best Songwriter of the Year category introduced, so we're starting to really celebrate songwriters beyond the other songwriting awards we have. Last question for you. As you think about how songwriters are getting paid, you touched on it, they're finding new ways. How do you sit on the idea of songwriters becoming involved in the master side of a royalty, or vice versa? Maybe an artist coming in and saying, well, I didn't write the song, but I want some publishing. Do you have an opinion on sharing both those two revenue streams?
I think at the core of it, I have to always fall back to what creatively did you contribute? And I wouldn't want an implication to suggest that an artist who didn't write anything could simply say, I just make me a songwriter because why? Because I'm putting the song, I recorded it and therefore make me a songwriter. I would resist that. But to have some degree of negotiated compensation, that's a business negotiation on both sides, I have no problem with sharing revenues. As long as it's upfront,
discussed,
and it's discussed, and it's not a fraudulent representation of what either side may have contributed.
Right.
So a songwriter should not be able to claim that they are a producer of a particular record any more than an artist should be able to claim that they're a songwriter if they didn't write.
So, Guy, at your firm, you guys see hundreds of deals. You see stuff coming across your desk, your computer, all day, every day. From your vantage point, what do you see as the future of our business for songwriters? And just give me one or two things to finish up that people coming into this industry, I get so many emails from young people that want to write songs. They're like, I've written this amazing song. I want to come to LA. I want to be in this industry. What would you say to young songwriters coming into this business for the next 5 or 10 years?
I would say they're going to have to work really, really hard. It always starts with hard work.
Mm-hmm.
I think it can be done as a pure songwriter, but I think they do need to integrate themselves into the creative process that we've been talking about. They do need to spend time in the studio. That just staying in front of their laptop,
right,
at Starbucks where they're
just writing down their lyrics and
they're just gonna be one of the many. And there is obviously with streaming, there's a huge proliferation of music. When you add AI into that, we're going to have maybe a little bit of competition.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they need to hone their skills. I think there's a tendency today to that songwriting has become easier and easier, and it's more accessible to people who maybe were as educated, classically in music or in instruments. And I think that's a great thing. But at the same time, I think we have to maintain that skill level where you're going to come to the table and you are going to be as great a songwriter as you possibly can. I would hate to see songwriting in general lapse into mediocrity.
Well, that's what we're in danger of if we continue to rely on AI or just looping things or other forms of new technology to do what songwriters do and diminish or dilute their craft. I think AI and other tech can be used to amplify and heighten and inspire and do things that you never thought of doing. But don't fall back into the pattern of, let's have AI write the lyric, or let's have AI create the beat. Use that stuff to make something different and something unique. So I'm also very, very bullish on where we are as an industry, but also more importantly, I'm really excited about the creativity that I think is going to come out in the next 5 or 10 years. All these people growing up with the access to more music, the access to listening and ingesting new inspiration, and then being able to create new things, to me is really, really exciting. So thank you for all the insight and the wisdom. You're a sharp guy.
You're welcome.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Susan Stewart. I'm the Senior Managing Director for the Songwriter and Composers Wing for the Recording Academy. And we're here today at the Mechanical Licensing Collective offices to speak with its CEO, Chris Arend, about everything that MLC does. And joining me today is Grammy-nominated songwriter and member of our Leadership Council, Ruby Amanfu. Thank you all so much for joining us today.
Thank
you. Chris, we know the MLC's been operating since 2021 as part of the Music Modernization Act, but I think there may be a few songwriters who still don't know exactly what the MLC does. So could you kind of explain that to us and tell us why it's so crucial for songwriters to register their songs with you?
Sure. And it's great to be here with you, Susan and
Thank
Ruby.
you so much. Me too.
The short answer is because we probably have money for you. The MLC administers a set of rights that songwriters have. Those rights relate to the use of your songs on streaming services in the U.S. So anytime a song that you have written is streamed on any streaming service in the U.S., it generates a royalty. Those royalties are paid to the MLC by the digital services, and then we look to pay you those money. So we want you to connect with us in order to get paid.
It's amazing. Thank you so much, Chris. I'm very grateful for the work the MLC does, and I can attest to there is money out there, and it is for us. So thank you for that. I have a big question for you that often comes up for me in my circles, and it's about streaming services. So what happens to the money collected from streaming services when it cannot be connected to the correct song?
Sure, it's a great question. And it was a big reason why the MMA was such an important piece of legislation that led to our creation. A lot of those royalties were not getting to songwriters. Mm-hmm. We are doing a much better job of matching and paying out money than the prior system. To date, we have matched about 90% of the royalties that have been paid to us. Wow. So most of the money is getting connected to a writer, but there is still money that isn't connected. Mm-hmm. And for that money, one of the benefits of being a member is you have access to a matching tool that we've made available that lets you search all of the data we have for those unmatched uses.
I love that tool.
To see if they relate to your songs. And yeah, if you've used it, you're basically searching for money.
Yeah.
And when you find something, you can then propose that match in the tool to a song that you've registered with us. Mm-hmm. Our team reviews it, and assuming it all looks good, within a couple months, you'll see the royalties that we've accumulated for those unmatched uses for as far back as we have them. And then you'll, of course, get royalties on a going forward basis anytime those songs are used again. So the matching tool is a big way that we are trying to help you as a writer see what we see and be a part of making sure that we pay you all the money that you're due.
Right. Songwriters need to get on there, start matching.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what happens then if a song still is not able to be connected correctly?
Well, that's another important aspect of the MMA. Congress did not want the MLC holding that money forever, nor did it want the MLC to use that remaining unmatched money to offset operating costs or to fund educational programs or any other purpose. The MMA specifies one specific last step in the process, and that is that the MLC will distribute those remaining monies on an equitable basis to the songwriters and publishers we were able to pay. So in that way, all of the writers and publishers who are connected with us will eventually see a pro rata share of that remaining money.
Okay.
But the good news is we are a long way off from getting to that point in the process. We have no plans to do an equitable market share distribution this year. I think it's highly likely we'll do one in 2025. So for now, our focus remains on making those connections,
Yes.
Matching as much as we can and paying it out.
Absolutely.
And so that means for you as a writer, there's still plenty of time to sign up with the MLC if you haven't, register your works, look for those missing royalties that might be in that unmatched pool, and help us connect those dollars to you.
Now is the time.
Yep.
So I want to talk for a minute about publishers. Right. So we know that publishers are the ones supposed to keep up with the catalog, make sure the data is accurate. But what can an individual songwriter do, whether or not they're with a publisher? So twofold question. What can an individual songwriter do to make sure that everything is in there correctly so that we can get paid?
Simple answer, and that is check your data. One of the things that has become so important now in our industry is making sure your data is accurate, because your music is being distributed digitally all around the world, and everyone who has a hand in that distribution process needs to know all the information that it can know about your contributions, which songs you've written, who your publisher is if you have one. So even if you're a published writer, fully published, it's still a great idea to go to websites like the MLC's and to check your own data. On our site, you can do that by going to our homepage and using our public search tool. It's easily accessible right at the top of the homepage. There's a yellow button that says public search. You click on that, and then you can immediately plug in your name. And just like you would do a Google search, you can search for your name and see all the songs that have been registered with us that list you as a writer. If you then see that there is something missing or something wrong in the data, and that song is represented by a publisher that you've done a deal with, then you can give that publisher a call and they will fix that for you.
I love that, not leaving it to somebody else only, you know, whether without a publishing company. Yeah, it's our business and we've got to look after it.
And more importantly, you know your data better than anyone.
Right.
So it's so important that you take ownership of that data for the work that you've done as a creator, and then make sure that it's right in all the places it needs to be right, to help your partners where you have them. And then, of course, if you are self-administered or self-published, meaning you do it yourself, not only can you check your data with us, but you can become a member with us and then do all of the things that a publisher might do to make sure you get paid directly.
Love it.
So not too complicated once you get used to the database and get used to using it. Earlier this year, the Copyright Office released a long-awaited ruling to protect the termination rights of songwriters who want to reclaim their copyrights. Can you talk to us about what that means for the MLC?
Sure. That was a really great development for all of us. The office's rule brought real clarity to an issue that had not previously been addressed by the office or by the courts or by Congress. And that clarity now allows us to administer those statutory termination claims much more effectively. So the office rule essentially says that once a songwriter exercises their statutory termination rights, they'll be entitled to receive any royalties for uses that take place after the effective termination date from the MLC. And that makes it easy for us then to know who gets those post-termination royalties.
That's wonderful.
That's
fantastic.
Huge. That's huge. I love it. So one topic of conversation that has been a constant in my world and in the songwriters community is it's been brought to our attention that the MLC has filed a lawsuit against Spotify. And I wonder if you can tell us briefly about that lawsuit and why it's important and appropriate to do something like that.
Sure. We filed the lawsuit because we believe Spotify underpaid royalties starting in their March distribution. I won't get into the details beyond that, But I will say that it is not just appropriate, it's really imperative for the MLC to take action in situations like this. One of the important statutory responsibilities that Congress assigned to us was the responsibility for enforcing the terms of the blanket license and making sure that the digital services that operate under that blanket license comply with all the requirements under the law and the regulations. So where there's a situation where we believe a DSP isn't complying with the law, it's our job under the law to enforce those rights. And we do that on your behalf because you don't have that right now directly.
Right.
So these enforcement actions are incredibly important. They represent the MLC's fulfillment of that statutory obligation to make sure that those rights are being enforced. And we, of course, are doing that for the benefit of rights holders. Yeah. The good news is we haven't had to do that much. We deal with the DSPs regularly, and we have good working relationships with them. And most of the time when issues arise, we're able to work those issues out very quickly and often before we even finish the distribution cycle, so that you as a rights holder are not impacted in any way.
Wow.
But where that isn't possible, this is one of the obligations we have under the law, and we certainly take that obligation very seriously.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you so much for all you do on behalf of songwriters. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much, Ruby. It's amazing to have a songwriter here posing these questions. I think anyone who sees this today will be so well informed. But Chris, if anyone wants to contact the MLC directly, what's the best way for them to do that?
Sure. And before I answer that, let me just thank you, Susan, and Ruby as well. The Recording Academy and the Songwriters and Composers Wing has just been a huge ally to us and a wonderful partner. We've done at least a dozen events with you that have allowed us to reach thousands of songwriters who needed to know about the MLC. So your advocacy has been incredibly important to us, and we're grateful for that. And we are, of course, excited to keep doing events
and
like
we will.
this.
We'll keep doing that.
But for those of you watching that want to learn more about us, first place I would recommend you go is to our website, www.themlc.com. We have a ton of information on our website aimed at songwriters and other rights holders that explains all the aspects of what we do, how we do it, and how the system works. You can also contact our support team, and I know, Ruby, that's something that you've done in the past.
A lot. Hours.
Which is fantastic. Yeah. That's why they're there. We have a fantastic support team available 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, and they will talk with you as long as you need, as many times as you need. And, because we know, especially for self-administered songwriters, the business is complicated, and it is not what you do day in and day out.
Right.
So we want to be there to provide you with that one-on-one support by phone or by email, or once you become a member of the MLC, we have a chat function in our portal. You can use that just to shoot a quick note if you want to someone. So contacting our support team is always another great option. And then the third one I'd mention is follow us on social media. Like every company out there and every artist, we have a good presence on all the major social media channels. It's where we provide updates on things that are happening with the business and often highlight the events that we're doing. So if you're interested in coming out to an MLC event, you'll see it announced on social media and you can come out and meet us in person. So follow us on the social media channel that you prefer, and we'll then hope to see you at an event in person soon.
Yeah. Awesome.
Thank you so much. Great information. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Ruby.
Thank you.
I'm excited to be here with the special guest, David Israelite from the National Music Publishers Association. David, thanks so much for joining us and being part of this conversation today.
Thanks for having me, Todd.
Sure. One of the things we want to do with this program is to help understand and explain to folks some of the threats and challenges that the songwriting community is facing right now. I know more than anything else, what's really dominated the conversation this year has been Spotify and just all these reports about Spotify paying less to songwriters, not paying what they're supposed to pay. And I'd really like to try to unpack that a little bit and help people really understand what's happening. To help set the stage, why don't we start with what happened 2 years ago? Because there was a really meaningful agreement that took place between music publishers and all the streaming services that kind of help set up where we are now. Can you kind of help us understand what happened then?
Sure. So the most important income stream for songwriters comes from digital streaming services. And the biggest of those is Spotify. For those that don't know, services like Spotify or Apple or Amazon, what they pay songwriters is regulated by federal law. It's very different than how it works for record labels and recording artists. For labels and artists, they negotiate the value of their sound recordings to these services like Spotify. But for songwriters, we're regulated where there is a 3-judge panel that's called the Copyright Royalty Board that sits in the Library of Congress. And every 5 years, there is a trial where the songwriters and music publishers are on one side of the courtroom and the digital music services are on the other side of the courtroom. Companies like Spotify, Apple, Amazon, YouTube, Pandora. And if you can, you sit down and you negotiate a settlement to that trial, or you go to court and you litigate for that trial. Well, we've done it both ways, but 2 years ago, we sat down with the digital companies and we were able to reach an agreement that allowed us to propose a settlement instead of going to court. And the settlement locked in the highest rates in the history of music services, the highest rates in the world in the United States. And both sides walked away from that settlement feeling good that we had kind of turned a corner and figured out a way to be business partners with each other instead of always going to court and fighting against each other. So there was a lot of optimism when that settlement was proposed to the court. And we are now sitting here basically in the second year of the 5-year settlement before we have to go through that process again. So that kind of sets up what started, what was supposed to be really a period of relative peace between the people that create the music and the companies whose businesses are basically built on the people who create the music.
Well, I like the way you said, we thought we had turned a corner, because I think that really represented everybody's hope and kind of where we embraced that agreement. As you really touted at the time, those represented the highest headline rates anywhere in the world for songwriters and publishers, and it was really exciting. So what went wrong? What happened from 2 years ago to now, where instead of turning the corner and having this great partnership, we're fighting again?
Right. Well, very unfortunately, we have turned the corner with many of the companies, but one in particular, Spotify, has now taken a course of action that we are back in conflict. And it gets very legal and very complicated, but put in simple terms, the court during the previous trial, where we were not able to reach a settlement, we actually litigated against each other. The court created a category of music services that were called bundles. It basically meant when you took a music service and you married it with a non-music product and you offered it to the consumer for one price. So for example, if you have an Amazon Prime subscription, there is a music service you get with that. That's a bundle. Or sometimes you would buy an Apple bundle that combined things like their fitness program or their news program with their music service. What happened with Spotify is that they looked at that law that allowed bundles to pay in a different way, and they decided to try to create what we believe is a fraudulent bundle, which is they constructed a product that was designed to try to take advantage of this category in a way that was not intended. So what Spotify did is back in November of last year, they started giving away a service as part of a music product that was called audiobooks. If you have a Spotify subscription, you may not have even noticed that it showed up in your account back last November. And then on March 1st, they very quietly launched the ability to buy audiobooks as its own product, a standalone service where you just got the book product. Now, they didn't advertise it. You can't even hardly find it if you look for it. But the significance of them now offering this as its own product, and the fact that they now had included it into all of the other music products, meant that Spotify, starting in March of this year, started to claim that all 44 million of their subscribers were now what's called a bundled subscriber. And what that meant for Spotify is that they got to argue that a lot of the revenue that's paid by the subscribers no longer goes to music. They now want to divert that revenue for the book product that probably most of their consumers don't even know is in their product or use. And it was a way for them to slash the royalties that they paid to songwriters. Now, we think that they did this in a way that was not legal. We think they did this in bad faith, in a way to just try to reduce what they pay to songwriters. And so we're in a dispute now with that one company. For the other companies, the settlement still works. Apple, Amazon, Google, and YouTube, Pandora. But Spotify uniquely is trying to, what they think is a loophole in the law, maneuver through it in a way where they can try to pay songwriters less.
So that just sounds extremely discouraging. I know for a lot of songwriters, when they read stories like this or see this kind of news, it just feels like more of the same. I know many songwriters already feel like streaming services don't pay them enough. A dispute like this could sound kind of distant or abstract, like it's a big tech company fighting with a big publishing company. The songwriters are just kind of somewhere way downstream. But there's real money involved here. I know, so there's been estimates and studies done talking about real revenue for songwriters. Can you help translate this to what it means for an actual songwriter that collects royalties on a regular basis? What are they really losing here?
Sure. And you're right. Songwriters have a lot of fights going on to get paid fairly. Unfortunately, this is probably the most egregious example of a company trying to not pay them. And as I mentioned earlier, it's the most important company for the most important income stream. And even though large publishing companies, all the way down to the smallest publishing companies, are also in this dispute, it's important to remember that about 75% of all of the money paid by these digital companies ends up with songwriters. So this is really mostly about a songwriter versus giant tech company dispute. So we believe that what Spotify is trying to do, we don't think they're going to get away with it, is to cut royalties probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $150 million for just this year. And because Spotify now has raised prices as of July 1st, that number is even greater, because we should be entitled to a higher percent of a larger revenue pool when they raise prices. So the $150 million estimate was a conservative estimate from before they actually raised prices. So there's a lot of money at stake in this dispute.
And if this continues unchecked, then year after year, that would continue to grow, right?
That's exactly right. And we hope not, but other companies could try to do similar things. Right now, the only company attempting to do this is Spotify. But you're right, the amount of money we would lose would grow year over year. And then obviously, when we get through this current 5-year period, we'll end up in court the next time arguing over what the rules should be going forward. But we don't accept that what they're doing is going to be okay. And obviously, we're going to fight it and try to get back the money that they're currently underpaying us.
So this all comes out of this definition of what a bundle is, and this idea that Spotify, as you said, kind of added something that most people didn't even notice that they had added to their product. Since these stories first started coming out, Spotify has kind of come back and said, well, actually, we do have an audio music only service. You can subscribe to different products. Did they fix it? Did they actually address the issue, or what's going on with that?
Sure, not at all. This is a company that thinks it's very clever. And so they try to figure out how to maneuver through the situation in a way that they can take advantage. Here's their problem. First of all, these 44 million subscribers did not choose to sign up for a bundle at a higher price. They signed up for a music only plan. And then what Spotify did, without telling them, without their consent, is they first started giving away this audiobook feature. Then they raised their prices. And then they told these 44 million customers, this is the new product that you're getting. You have no alternative. We obviously complained. They were obviously sued. And so what they later did is, for some people, go back and offer a music only service. But to take advantage of that, you have to jump through a lot of hoops. You have to quit your current service. You have to go rejoin a new service that was not available to you when they converted you without your permission or your consent. And so we believe that what they've done is not only really unfair to songwriters, it's also unfair to their own customers. And that's why we've also filed a complaint with the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission. And we've also reached out to 11 different state attorneys general, because we believe they have violated consumer protection laws in those states involving false and deceptive business practices for what they've done to their own consumers.
Well, you've explained the problem really clearly, and I think really well, in a way that songwriters can understand how this really is going to impact them. You started to touch on how we're responding, like what can be done to change this, and as you said, we don't think they're going to get away with it. But let's talk about some of those different pathways. It's kind of a choose your own adventure. There's a few different branches happening to get Spotify to do this the right way. The first one I want to start with is the Mechanical Licensing Collective, the MLC itself. It's been reported that they've filed a lawsuit against Spotify. Can you help kind of unpack what is that lawsuit about specifically, and why is the MLC the right one to do it? Because there's been some questions about that as well. Why are they the correct place to go for this?
Sure. So for those that don't know, the Mechanical Licensing Collective, or the MLC, is one of the many amazing benefits that came out of the Music Modernization Act that was passed just a few years ago, about 6 years ago, which the Recording Academy and we and others worked very hard to pass. It is the body created by law that licenses all of the songs, collects the money, and distributes the money to songwriters and publishers for these types of services. And so when Spotify started paying the MLC the wrong amount, because they were claiming they got to pay them under this bundled category, which is at a lower rate than the regular music service, the MLC responded in the appropriate way, which is that under law, the MLC has the ability to file a lawsuit in federal court, which is what they did. The MLC's lawsuit alleges that what Spotify is doing is not a proper bundle under the law, that Spotify has underpaid the songwriters and music publishers, and that Spotify has to cure the lower amounts that they've been paying, and that the court should order them to do that. So that lawsuit is currently pending. There had been some complaint by the digital companies that maybe the MLC shouldn't be taking sides in the fight between the songwriters it represents and the digital companies that pay it. And very fortunately for us, the member of Congress who basically wrote this law, Doug Collins, wrote an op-ed in Billboard where he declared publicly this is exactly what the MLC was intended to do. So I think that cleared up any confusion that the MLC is the proper body to bring these types of lawsuits to protect the publishers and the songwriters under the law.
That's great. That's really helpful. You also touched on some things that the NMPA is doing as well. You mentioned the FTC and state attorney generals. Kind of go back through that again. Let us know what your organization is doing right now to counteract this.
Sure. So when Spotify took this action, it really was a declaration of war against songwriters. And so while we're very pleased that the MLC has filed this federal lawsuit, and that lawsuit will play out, we're going to respond all-encompassing against this type of attack against the songwriter's most important revenue stream. And so there are lots of different things that we're doing. I mentioned that we filed a complaint with the FTC. We filed a complaint with 11 states. These are states that either have a strong music community or have very strong consumer protection state laws that we believe were violated. We also reached out to Congress and said, we think it's time that Congress take a fresh look at how this system is working, because it's not really fair that record labels and artists get to negotiate the value of what they create in a free market, but yet the songwriters and music publishers don't. This would never happen to record labels and artists. In fact, this little gimmick that Spotify tried to create didn't impact record labels and artists in a negative way, because it can't. Only hurts the songwriters and music publishers that are governed by this law. So we believe there are lots of different areas we can respond with to try to get Spotify to correct its course. This is not a company that cares about songwriters or how they feel. So they're not going to change their course of action. If they think they can save $150 million, they're going to do it unless their hand is forced. And that's why the music community really needs to rise up and respond in a very strong way, because Spotify is not a company that will just correct course because it wants to help the people that help create its own business. And quite honestly, if the songwriting and music publishing community unites and comes together, Spotify doesn't have a business without them. And so I really believe that we can fix this, if not through the courts, through the power of songwriters and people who care about songwriters that decide to push back.
Well, I think you really set up my last question really well about how we can unite and come together. I think, as you know, our teams work together really well and have been on Capitol Hill trying to educate lawmakers about what's happening. But for individual songwriters, a songwriter, a composer, somebody in the community who's watching this and wondering, like, what can I do? I'm glad all this other stuff is happening. I'm glad other people are trying to make a change, but what can I do individually? What would you say to them?
Yeah, and it's a great question, because I think a lot of times creatives, they get upset about what's going on, but they don't know what to do about it. The first thing I would say is that you need to join and get active in the organizations that fight for your interests. So obviously, I hope the people that are watching this are already members of the Recording Academy, but be active in the Recording Academy. Join the chapters, pay attention to the materials they send out, because they're fighting for you. There are songwriter advocacy groups that do the same thing, like NSAI or SONA. So be active in a group that is looking out for your interests. That would be number one. Number two, NMPA has put out a lot of very specific things that songwriters can do to help push back against Spotify. And so if you'll just look at either the NMPA social media or my personal social media, you'll find very detailed instructions about how to write to Congress about this, how to write to the FTC about this. If you live in a state such as California or New York or Tennessee, how to reach out to your state attorney general about this. And so we'll give you those tools to help join this fight. But the number one thing I would say to do is just be a part of a larger community that's already taking these fights on, like the Recording Academy.
That's great. We really appreciate that. So give us some hope, some optimism here as we wrap up. This can sound really daunting to engage in these fights, and I'm sure some songwriters just throw up their hands. But how do you think this is going to turn out, and what is some guarded reason for hope here?
Sure. And look, this is a big fight, and this is an important fight. But I don't want to give the impression that things are not going in the right direction overall for songwriters. We are in a period right now where more people consume more music than at any time in history. And revenue for the industry has been going up in a very steady way. The problem for a lot of songwriters is that the business has changed. It used to be that if you had a song on an album, that you could make a decent living if that album did well. We live in a world today where mostly people are listening to hits. They're not buying full albums. And so what's happened is the people at the very top of the songwriting pyramid are doing okay. And because now more and more people are able to get their music out there, there's a much longer tail of songwriters who are making something from their music. But the middle class of songwriters is what's getting squeezed. And that's just been the economics of the business. And so it's very important that in a world where people are not buying albums, but rather maybe they're listening to music on social media like TikTok or Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or X, that the compensation to songwriters starts to reflect the value of the music to those services. And so the types of fights that advocacy groups like the Grammys, like NMPA are taking on are trying to expand the playing field of making sure that songwriters are compensated appropriately where their music is being used, because we're not going to go back to the days of getting people to buy CDs. but we are in a period of time where lots of people are consuming lots of music in lots of different ways. And so it's really a struggle about just getting the compensation to reflect the value of the songs. So the industry is doing okay. Individual songwriters might be struggling, and that's why we both spend so much of our focus on trying to make sure they have the same opportunities as writers did before them, that we're in a different business environment. So join the fight, help us do that. And this one particular fight, we're going to win.
Well, I believe information is power, and this has been just tremendously informative. Thank you so much for helping us understand this and unpack what's really happening. So thank you, David Israelite. Thank you to the NMPA and for our partnership and friendship through the years. Appreciate all that we're doing together. And thank you for spending time with us today.
My pleasure. And thanks to you and the Grammys for all you do as well.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to our Songwriters panel today. With the S&C Wing's focus on best practices this year, we can't think of any better way to have this conversation than with two incredible multi-genre songwriters. Julian Veneta is a songwriter and a producer and a member of our S&C Wing Leadership Council, and he's written hits for Harry Styles, Teddy Swims, One Direction, Sabrina Carpenter, Thomas Rhett, and so many more. And also joining us is Steph Jones. Steph Jones is a songwriter and vocal producer, and she's written songs for Sabrina Carpenter, Kelsey Ballerini, Pink, Selena Gomez, and Little Big Town, to name a few. So welcome to both of you. Thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome.
And Tom, let's start with you. You want to kick off our conversation?
Sure. Thanks, Susan. Julian and Steph, thanks so much for being here with us. For young songwriters, I know when they get started in the business, a lot of times they may be thinking about their artistry and about their craft. They're not always thinking about their careers long-term or just the business side of being a great songwriter. For you, looking back on where you are in your career, what would be a piece of advice that you would give to a new songwriter coming up, both on the creative side and just on the professional side of making a living as a songwriter?
You want me to go first? I think that I would first remind yourself of why you like doing what you're doing, because I think that will carry you through a lot of hard times if you stay connected to why it is you're doing this in the first place. And I think another thing I would say on the creative side is to just really hone in on what your strength is in the room and learning what you're good at and what, like in a room, like what your place is and what you feel like you bring, and learning how to change that up too, if you can, like learning how to serve a writing room. And I think on the career side, I mean, I think the biggest thing I think about is thinking about your team, because you see someone even like winning a Grammy or whatever, you think about all the people they're thanking, and you remember that this is not done alone. We all have people behind us that have helped us, and in those beginning stages, it's really important to find people you trust and that are going to come alongside you and teach you as you go, because we're all still learning. I still don't know sometimes, like, thank God for my manager, Rhea, you know what I mean? Like, but yeah, really getting your team and staying connected to your why are the first two things like I think about. So
yeah, agreed. My dad would always say, it's not who you know, it's who you avoid. And because you can know a lot of people that can take you down a lot of long roads that you have to walk back from and learn really hard business lessons. The music business is a place that doesn't require qualifications to be in.
interesting.
You don't need any type of degree. You don't need any type of school, any type of training. So anybody can be in the music business and come in and say, hey, I'm a manager. Hey, I'm a songwriter. Or hey, I'm a producer. And there's a lot of people that like will steal from you. There's a lot of people, if you allow yourself to be taken advantage of, people will. So you have to do your due diligence and understand what publishing is, what songwriting, like how you get paid. You have to do your due diligence. Like if you were playing basketball, you would know the rules of basketball, wouldn't you? You wouldn't like be like, cool, I'm gonna play basketball, but so what's a foul?
Right.
What's a technical?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's no other world where you'd go into another dentistry because you're like, oh, what does this drill do? Open your mouth, like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
But for some reason, the music business, because it's under the guise of being creatives, and creatives are aloof and flighty and whatever, it's almost like people excuse themselves from having to do their homework and from learning the rules and learning how things work, because it's kind of complicated. Music business is complicated. The way money flows is really complicated if you don't know about it. And so I think it's really important for people to like do their homework, learn, because if you know what you're doing, you can't get taken advantage of. You won't.
Interesting.
It's all harder to at least get taken advantage
Yeah.
of.
We were talking earlier about people doing their homework. So what do you think are some common mistakes people make when they're starting out as a songwriter?
I don't know. I mean, it's a tough one, like, because those mistakes, you can't, they're unavoidable. Like, there's certain things that there's mistakes that are almost like you have to make in order to, like, gain wisdom and to be able to look back and not make it again. It's like...
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to know what a good song is unless I write bad ones.
Yeah.
So,
Totally.
I mean, but some mistakes, I guess, just, yeah, that's actually interesting, the mistakes, because it's funny to ask a creative that, because I think, like,
Yeah.
mistakes end up being amazing,
Right.
like, even on, like, recordings and things like that. But I think it goes back to what we said before, too, of just knowing what it is that you're bringing to a room. I think the biggest mistake someone could make is not knowing their own power in the room and not trusting themselves.
Interesting.
Because,
Yeah.
like that is, what we are. We end up being like these personalities and people and things that people remember you for. That's why
Yeah.
you're brought back into the room. And if I don't know, I think maybe not trusting myself early on is probably a mistake
Yeah,
I've
not
personally
saying what's
made.
on your
Not
what's
saying-
what's on your heart. Like,
Yeah.
I really think we should do this.
Yeah, yeah.
But you're invited for a reason.
Yeah,
Yeah, totally.
definitely.
Not
Yeah.
speaking up if I don't like a song or where it's going, like not saying like, hey, I don't like where this is going. Can we try doing this, and just kind of like letting it ride? Or it's not necessarily a mistake. Like, you learn again.
Oh, yeah.
You learn. You go back next thing. I should have said something, and so you
Yeah.
go back the next.
That's
I
time.
also
really
think the
good.
biggest mistake you could ever make is being rude to someone.
Well, yeah.
Even if you think that this person is awful, or if you think, that this person couldn't possibly be of benefit to you, that's actually the scariest person to ever be rude to. We have no idea where people are going to be in 5 years, and 2 years, and in 1 year, and the way you represent yourself in a room or in a write, or, I think actually I will say that is a huge mistake. I think that, it's really
Yeah,
easy for
treating
people
people
to
like-
want to work with you when you're doing well.
Yeah.
But, when that, every wave you ride, it lands again. And then you're left, with what? Like, do people want you in the room? Do people enjoy being around you? Are you trustworthy? Do you treat people with respect?
Yeah, being in a creative industry doesn't like make you exempt from like common decency that you would want when you go to the dentist or when you go to the supermarket. Would you want somebody to just like treat you like shit?
Yeah.
Like if you walk in the studio and you like rude to the person who's the engineer, or like it is weird though, because in the music industry it's sort of allowed because there's famous people and people are eccentric and creative and stuff, so it's like, but that would be a huge mistake.
Yeah.
Like I've seen it happen to people where they were really rude to somebody, and then a couple of years later that person they were rude to is now holding the gates to something.
Yeah.
And they remember, you want to treat everybody well and be respectful. I mean,
Yeah. Great. You've talked a lot about having a good team around you, about how you treat people and trust people. How do you each find the people that you trust, that you can rely on to give you the right kind of information, to tell you when you're wrong, to tell you when you need to do something different, or to help look out for your interests? How did you build that network for yourself?
I have a brother, so I luckily, my dad was in the music business, is in the music business. My brother is, so I was fortunate to have people that I trust and that I work well with. But I work with a lot of other people that are part of our company that, you know, I'm not related to. And I think you just, you know, it's the same way you pick friends. You want to, whatever anybody's mechanism is to getting to know somebody and doing their own due diligence internally to getting to know someone, it's no different. It's like you watch the way that person represents himself in a room. You watch how they talk about other people. You know, do they go everywhere and just badmouth people everywhere they go, or do they, you know, are they courteous? Do they do their due diligence? You know, in their area of expertise. There's no real way, I guess. You just find your chemistry with somebody, because someone that works for me might not work for you, and someone that works for her completely might not work for me. So you just have to.
It's kind of like dating, I guess. Or, you know, like working with someone, like when I met Julian, I'm like, can I cry in this writing set? I'm just kidding. If I can cry and we keep going, we're good. I'm just kidding. And I can cry in front of Julian, actually. He's seen me many times.
That's kind of nice.
But I think that you also learn what, you know, who you can trust by learning who you can't. And, you know, that's the only way, you know, and sometimes it is by trial and error and, you know, getting a great lawyer, getting those like basic people in place. You are the basics of, I think, of just kind of starting to build on trust and having someone that you can check in with. And, but these are people like managers and things are friends and their coworkers. And, you know, it's an interesting dynamic, but I guess that's the main thing is like learning. You don't know how to trust unless you know what it feels like when you can't, you know? So.
Yeah, it goes back to the mistakes thing. It's like you can't go through 10 years, 20 years in this business without like a deal going bad or getting burnt by somebody. It happens. But the more you're in it and the more times it happen, you can then see it coming from further away and avoid it. But you have to go through those things, and ultimately, you know, if those little things, if one of them was going to be the end all be all that made you never be in the music business again, then you weren't going to be in the music business, because there's hurdles all along the way to get where you want to get. There's always hurdles that you have to get over, around, under, through. If you can't figure out a way to have resolve and get past the things that happen, you weren't gonna make it anyway. You can't get through unscathed, you know. So you have to just, like she said, why do you do this? Why do you do this? What is the joy that you love about music? Find that. Always go back to that, and you know that and a couple other things in your team can help get you through times when nothing's happening, or when, like, you know, someone, you know, screwed you over for something, or you didn't see something coming. Whatever it is, you have to have those backstops to keep you going.
Yeah, keep you passionate too.
Keep you passionate and keep you inspired.
Right.
Yeah.
So what about new opportunities now that maybe you didn't have 5 years ago? How is the market evolving and delivering those?
Oh, I think it's sneaky. I mean, I know for me, I just think about years ago, I thought, oh, I want to work with like the biggest artist, and that's how you have success, is you work with this giant, already known, you try to get in with the song to this person, and that's what matters. And now I think that everyone has to be in the development stage, and everybody has to be willing to develop and willing to grow with an artist or with a project, and spot talent yourself and what you actually believe in. Because you know, I think we're in a time where, you know, we've seen on the radio, on streaming, like a new artist can emerge from anywhere. A hit can come from anywhere. And so
more so now than 10 years ago.
Yeah. So now it's more like, I mean, even labels, it's just like, we don't know who to focus on. And so it's up to you. Who do you believe in? And building from there.
I love that.
Where I do think 5 years ago, maybe it truly was more like, if I could only get my song to this person, but they have just as much of a chance as everyone, if not almost less than sometimes, to like have another big song, you know, versus somebody who's fresh and
unafraid and just comes out and makes their own lane for themselves. So I think that's one thing I
That's
think about.
exciting and it's hopeful.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
super exciting.
Yeah.
And it can happen, anywhere. So many young artists that kind of emerged this year are just dominating Spotify and radio. And so there's no, you have to do your own sort of A&R work.
I like that. That's neat.
How have you seen, beyond streaming, we've seen social media platforms take a much bigger role in how music gets discovered. We've seen fitness apps. There's just so many new things that didn't even exist 5 to 10 years ago in terms of music discovery and distribution. How has that impacted you as a songwriter? And what do you see as kind of the potential or the upside of that going forward?
The upside.
I guess the upside is that there's just so many other ways for songs to be discovered. Really, it's like where it used to be the only mechanism was the radio or a movie, and there's only so many songs that can be played on the radio in an hour or in 2-hour time, and only so many songs that you can put into a movie. That's all out the window now. So it can happen anytime, and now you have somebody could be walking down the street or driving down the street with a song playing out the window, and you can pull your phone out and see what that song is, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Anywhere, anytime, something can be playing and you can find out what it is. So I think it's really good, and hopefully, it lets the people really decide what they want as opposed to getting fed,
Right.
what the business wants to go forward.
That's
Yeah.
really good.
There's pros and cons to both, but the pros is that it can come from anywhere. Somebody in a bedroom that just made a silly video, and
Yeah.
a song blows up.
Totally.
It's awesome.
Yeah, music is decided more by the people now than ever. It's really not just a label deciding what's happening. I mean, it's pretty insane to see how something just the people have decided, you know what I mean, that this is the song now, and that is what it is, so it's exciting. It's crazy, but it's exciting.
So taking it just a little turn, do you have concerns for songwriters in the future?
Yeah,
Big
time. I have big concerns. I've had steady music coming out for my whole career. I've been doing this for I've been signed for probably 10 years or so. And, I just in the last probably 3 or 4 years have been able to support myself on something beyond a publishing advance, which you owe back, by the way.
Right.
So that's good to remember. This is not free money. A publishing advance is something you have to pay back with your earnings. And our earnings are smaller than ever because of all these streaming. As exciting as it is for an artist to be able to be discovered, it does cut into a songwriter being able to provide for themselves. So, it's a really interesting time. I feel very lucky, but I also feel that because of that, it is my duty to, speak about how unfair, percentages and how everything is split up is. And, I have worked really hard for a long time, and I'm always I'm doing good, but I could be doing gooder, and there are writers that I know that are incredible. I laugh, you know what I mean? But because it's messed up though, there are amazing writers. If I didn't have a song, I've had sometimes 20 to 30 songs come out in a year. But one song ended up being on the radio and was oh my God, thank God I can live. I had a point where I thought, I'm having 25, 30 songs come out, but if something doesn't go onto the radio, I don't know if I'll be able to keep doing this. And that's insane to have, that many major label songs released and not able to even pay my rent.
I haven't even heard it put that way.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. It's
And the unfortunate thing is that it starts with the song, but everybody else around the song will make some money around it. Producer gets paid by the label to make the track. The mixer gets paid to mix it and gets residuals. But even if there is no residuals and the song doesn't do anything, they get paid their fee. You know, the label's going to make some off of streaming, whether it's 5 million streams, 10 million. There's still, and the last person to make anything is the songwriter. And
Yeah.
it starts with the song. And if it was just a world of producers and artists, you know, and there was no songwriters, it would be pretty unfortunate for popular music, because like all of some of the greatest songs in the last 20, 30 years were written by more than just the producer and the artist in the room, you know?
Yeah. I mean, when we're at the point where even the person who is important, but the person who is mixing and mastering my song is making more money than I do on the song that I wrote, that's a problem. You know, it's really, it becomes a place of, it's sad because it just shows a lack of value put on something that I do think people see as valuable. I think we can all agree that is a valuable part of a song. We all need each other. This is, you know, but it is unfortunate, and it's devastating actually, you know, that it just is showing a lack of value and for something that is very valuable.
Julian and Steph, we can't thank you enough for being here today. We've learned a lot. We really appreciate your time. Thanks for all you do for songwriters and for the Academy. We appreciate it.
Thank you so
much.
much.
Thank you.
so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.